Good afternoon. We are today on Congress of Generations, second Congress of Generations, which is an event hosted by Fundacja Firmy Rodzinne, who published Polish version of book which is in English entitled If It Is So Good to Talk, Why Is It So Hard? Polish title, which is literal translation, not very often found in translations of books. Skoro tak dobrze jest rozmawiać, to czemu tak trudno? And we are having today author of the book, Mr. Ian Marsh, who has helped for more than 40 years several tens of entrepreneurial families in their conflicts. And we would like to discuss and talk a bit about a few key messages and key points that are in this book, which, as we think, may help entrepreneurial families in running their businesses in a better way, or at least in a more smooth way in terms of succession. I'd like to start with the thing about emotions. How can we do it, if it's possible at all, to do the thing which is sometimes described in negotiations literature as turning off the emotions or dividing them from the problem?
Thanks, Konrad. I don't think you can actually turn off the emotions. They're a fundamental part of us and they're absolutely key to the way we work as human beings. If you look at people who have no emotion, people on the autistic spectrum, one of the features they have is that they can list the pros and cons of any analysis, but they're unable to make a decision. So emotions are things that drive us to do things. You can, of course, separate the emotion from a substantive problem. If you're negotiating a commercial contract, there are issues in that contract which are not emotional. But the parties will inevitably bring their emotions into the room. And I think you have to engage those emotions if you want the conversation to reach any meaningful conclusion. Because if you don't engage somebody's emotion, you're effectively denying their experience. And denying somebody's experience closes them down very quickly. They stop hearing you, they stop reading your face. And the conversation comes to an end.
Which means denying somebody's experiences and feelings makes the conversation a failure before it even starts for good.
Yes. And physiologically, it's almost inevitable. When we get angry, and most of us feel anger if our emotional experience isn't acknowledged, then tiny muscles in the ear change, the muscles around the eyes change, your vocal cords change, all the things that are designed to make us social animals switch off, and it becomes all about survival, me. And that means there's no connection anymore, and without connection there can be no conversation.
So bearing that in mind, what is the best way, or let's say a good way, to enter the conversation to make sure it will go, it won't stop with the first exchange of sentences?
To make those opening sentences curious, questions, inquiry. The quickest and easiest way to connect with somebody else is to invite them to tell you how they are experiencing whatever situation it is you're discussing. They will experience it differently than you do. And it is denying that is the denial of experience. So if you start by inviting them to tell you how they feel about things, and you then respond to that, recognizing and acknowledging that feeling, then you build a connection.
That's when we made the first success and arranged things to make the conversation happen. Who, if we take a step back, who should be responsible for making the conversation happen? Is it a frequent mindset that people say, it's not my turn now, it's their turn, so I will wait for them to respond?
I think in conflict, I would put it more in terms of an attitude that they broke it, they should fix it. In negotiation, sometimes, if you have made an offer, it's easy then to say they have to come back with a counter offer. For them to say, that's not good enough, isn't a proper response. It's not an engaged response. But I would say, to your question generally, if you're really comfortable in your skin, not having the conversation, maybe it's not for you to take responsibility, because it doesn't matter to you whether it happens or not. If you have an interest in it happening, then you should take some responsibility for it. And in most conversations around succession, everybody should take some part of the responsibility. They will all take some part of the responsibility if there is no conversation and things then unfold in an unfortunate way.
So if the term already has turned up, the succession is the issue, the matter that should interest both parties, or more than two parties, but let's say there are successors and there is the elder. What are the motivations to bring the thing up and start the conversation? Whatever the party should do it. What is their interest in starting the conversation? Why is it better to start it than to wait?
You're having a conversation about it, whether you have a conversation or not. Because if there is no spoken conversation, if it troubles somebody, then their mind is writing the script that might go on. People will assume the motivations of other people in not having the conversation. A child may assume, if his parents don't want to talk about succession to him or her, but they are to another sibling, that they're loved less. That happens too much of the time. The interest for the older generation in having the conversation is that it's only when they're there to have the conversation that they can genuinely, positively affect the outcome. The end outcome will always depend on their children, because they will carry it forward, the business forward. But if you wait until the elder generation is dead and there is just documents to express an intent, then suddenly the children have to deal with this without any guidance, what their parents really wanted, and while they're grieving the loss of their parents, which is a bad time to be making any important decision.
Which means that if we are experiencing strong emotions, we shouldn't engage in serious conversations.
I wouldn't say that. I think if you're feeling very angry, maybe take some time to calm. If you're in the middle of grief, you're very sad. Grieving is an isolated process mentally. It's not the best time. That's not the best time to make decisions. But other strong emotion, if you're feeling them, then express them in the conversation, but without acting out on them necessarily.
I would like to bring up one topic from the book, which is it's always good to have somebody to talk to. Why is it so, and what if we literally don't have anybody, a living person, to have this conversation with? What then?
Okay, let's take that in two parts. It's good because if you have somebody who you can talk to, who won't judge you, who will be open to what you say, accept what you say, will not try to mend you, will not try to tell you what to do, somebody who will genuinely just be alongside you and listen, it aids reflection. The danger is if you just try this on your own, it becomes rumination. It just goes round like an endless loop and never goes anywhere. You focus on the past, which you can't change. If you don't have people in your life, and I would say one of the things you should do is work to have people in your life you can have those conversations with. In my life, I'm very fortunate. I have 4 or 5 people who, between them, I can't think of a subject I couldn't have a conversation about. There is no one of them that I could talk to about everything, but between them, fine. If you're not so fortunate, there are professionals out there to talk to, people who are professional listeners, people with an openness of mind to do that, and I would use those rather than not. But also, it sounds strange, but there are 2 mental exercises you can do effectively. One is to think of somebody you would like to be a friend or a mentor, and to imagine what that person would say to you, which would probably be very little. They would probably want to listen to you, but it gives a focus to your mental process. And if you're a person of faith, that could be Jesus or the Buddha or any wise person that you think of, but it doesn't need to be. It could just be your idealized version of a friend. The other approach that works for some people is to imagine your best friend being in your situation and to think how you would behave in relation to them and what they might then say in response. Both have been shown to work for some people.
The book is generally and particularly about dialogue, about conversation. However, you devote quite a lot of space in the book to meditation and mental exercises, which are not meant for couples or bigger groups of people. They are for a single person to perform. Could you please explain how meditation and other related activities of such kind help having a good conversation?
Sure. The way to have effective communication, we've touched on much of it, is to be curious, to be open, to be accepting, and to do it all with, you can describe it as love, loving kindness, or simply assuming the other person has a positive mental attitude. Compassion would be another word. Meditation practices are a great way of practicing all of those things. Just sitting and focusing on your bodily sensations, your emotional experience in the moment, your thoughts as they come and go, is itself an exercise in curiosity. And you learn with time to be open and accepting. There's a perception in some areas that meditation is about having a still mind. It's about, for me, it's about being comfortable with not having a still mind. The mind rages, I experience all manner of thoughts, emotions and so on, but I know that I am more than those things. I don't have to act out on my thoughts. It's in that pause between experiencing it and doing something that Viktor Frankl famously said is where we have choice and agency. And I think also on the compassion side of things, it's very difficult to be compassionate towards somebody else if you can't be compassionate towards yourself. If you're busy beating yourself up in these discussions because you think you're not worthy of any of these negative mindsets and you're uncomfortable with them, you're not really going to be listening to what the other person says because you're too self-absorbed. So sitting and doing the various meditation practices described there, and there are many others, you practice the curiosity, the openness, the acceptance, and compassion for yourself, which then in turn makes you more compassionate for others. And the really interesting thing for me is many of these practices happen to be drawn from the Buddhist psychology tradition, but they've all been subjected to testing and research in the most modern of neuroscience labs, which show they work not just for monks who've done this for thousands of hours, but also for people who've done 4 or 5 weeks of it.
Are those exercises a good point to start if somebody is struggling to start the conversation they feel they need to make happen?
I would say yes. They've made many conversations of mine easier. I've seen them make conversations easier for clients that I've worked with. And I think for me, when ancient traditions and modern science and my direct experience all say the same thing, I'm pretty persuaded by that. So I would certainly say yeah. Will they work for everybody? Nothing does. But I would say it's worth a try.
Are there any tips for people who have the feeling of the conversation to start, but they don't know where to start? Is there anything apart from those mental exercises to perform to make it easier to make the conversation happen?
Go back to your friends, real or imaginary, people you can trust with your confidences, and practice the conversations if you're not at ease with them. If you know people who know your situation and respect your confidence, reverse the roles. Have them play you and you play the person you need to have the conversation with. It's a really powerful way of starting to see where things might go wrong. The simplest analysis, I think, is understand what it is you really want out of this and keep drilling down until there's no more. When you analyse what it is you want, say to yourself, so is there anything else? Why is that important to me? Until you can't get further down. And then think about why the other person might find that difficult to deliver or to talk about. What is it in their life that would make that difficult? Think about why they might experience the world very differently than you. I think with the succession question, people have very different backgrounds. Here in Poland, you've told me you've had 30 years of freedom, so your founding generation is a first generation. They have experience of what came before. They have experience of not freedom. The people they're handing on to, or hoping to hand on to, don't share that experience. perhaps. And that's a very different, they've grown in different worlds, they have different experiences, so they will see that world differently. Children who have grown up in comfort, let alone with wealth, see things very differently than parents who started in poverty and created wealth. And I think we have to say too that digital natives communicate very differently than those of us who grew up and started working before the photocopier was common in every office, and when typewriters were manual, and so on. Think about those things, because all those seemingly trivial things have an effect on how the people you need to talk to have seen the world.
All right. So to wrap it up, what would be your advice to families who will have to face the challenge of succession and they haven't done any planning yet? What would be the first step to make just to get the stone rolling off the hill?
Think about it. Be curious about it. Be very open to anything that might come out of it. And then find opportunities gently to talk about the future. It can be difficult for elder generations because succession inevitably means thinking about your own mortality. Because, as I've learnt recently, even thinking about retirement brings thoughts of your own mortality. Frame the conversation, but try not to have taboos. The real conversation means letting people express their thoughts and then exploring them. Be open, be curious.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.